Review, review. Okay, review. Okay, we left off with the central plan, and let me fix this right here, and let's do this and this. In the East, in Byzantine, churches look like this one on the left. In the West, in Europe, churches look like the one on the right. So the octagonal one, that is central plan, and then the one that looks like a cross, that is the basilica plan. The last time we looked at the basilica plan was the old St. Peter's, and it was basically just a solid rectangle. We are going to be looking at lots of churches, and this is the one on the right is the ones that are very similar to the ones that we will be looking at. But you can see the nave down the middle, and there are aisles on the sides. And then in the old St. Peter's, we could just barely notice a transept. But in the later churches, they began to develop the transept to make the whole thing look like a cross if you are looking down on it. And then the that circular bit at the end, that is the apse. All right. I need you to know this term right here, the ambulatory. The ambulatory is basically the aisle of the central plan. It serves the same purpose as an aisle serves in a basilica plan church. And then we are going to look at the apse of this particular church in San Vitale. Our artwork is in the apse. But on the inside of the, everybody get that? Ambulatory. Uh, I don't care about extension. All right, so the interior of the San Vitale is loaded with beautiful mosaics and lots of beautiful marble as well. The mosaics are very narrative and very colorful. And if we look closely at a mosaic, it is made up of different tiles called tesserae. Tesserae? Tesserae. And these are individual little segments of colored glass. The ones that are gold is a piece of gold leaf sandwiched between two pieces of glass. And then also in these mosaic murals are pearl. You see these round parts right here, those are pearl. And then one of the interesting things I think of when I look at these, when I look at the details of these mosaics, is that the artists are using interesting colors. You know, they it's not just a flat color. They're using all kinds to make shades and shadows and outlines and values, and that is very interesting to me. It would be very much easier for the artist to use boring colors, but they don't. So look closely at the line around the bottom of the nose. It's not brown. Like it should be a brown outline if it's to be consistent with all the rest, but it's not. It is this bright orange or this rusty orange. Even the bottom lip is a bright orange. And when you look up close, it may seem odd, but when you look from far away, because you're standing on the ground of these churches, looking up at the ceilings that are quite high, that as it gets further away, it looks like it's the right color. but when you look up close, it is an unusual color. If you ever go to an art museum and look closely at paintings, especially of the uh, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, if you look closely at the flesh tones of the people, they have quite bright colors in them. You don't see it when you're standing far away. You don't see it when you're looking at the picture on a computer screen or in a book. But when you're actually standing in front of an actual work of art, you see the colors more richly than what is portrayed on the computer screen or in a book. And that is why I encourage everybody to go to the art museum to look at art. You'll see things that are not visible elsewhere. All right, moving on. If we go through this church and go into the nave area, and there are two paintings on the left and the right that we are going to look at. So this is what it looks like when we're approaching, and it is the eastern end, and just at the end there is an apse with a mosaic in the apse, and then on the two sides of that apse are the two artworks that we're going to look at. They are of Justinian and Theodora, who are the emperor and the empress of the Byzantine Empire. So this church is in Ravenna, which is close to Venice in Italy. They are the emperor and empress are in Constantine. So they sent generals to retake Italy from the Goths, and they reestablished their Orthodox beliefs in Ravenna. So the message of these two mosaics that we're going to look at is the reassertion of the Eastern imperial control over this area once again. So in the apse, we have Christ in the middle, and we have two angels on the. We have an angel on the left and the angel on the right that are surrounding Christ, and then we have Saint Vitalis, which is what the church is named after, and then the bishop on the right. Saint Vitalis would have been a martyr that the town worships. It's their patron saint. So. Christ is handing the crown of victory to Saint Vitalis. He is the martyr of the city. A martyr is somebody that dies for the cause. And then on the right, we have a donor portrait. I would like you to write this term down, donor portrait. It's not up there. And I know that we'll be looking at it again. I know that it'll be on the test, either if not the unit 3 test, it will show up on the Renaissance test, but it's an important thing to know. So when you go and let's look at this guy right here, this bishop. He is holding a miniature building. The miniature building is a model of the church that you're standing in. And the message here is that the bishop is saying, I made this church for Jesus. I made it for God. And so the angel is accepting it on behalf of Jesus. So anytime you're looking at these old artworks and they have somebody with a miniature building, that is called a donor portrait. They built that building and they're giving it to God. They built it for God. All right, so let's move on to the two artworks of interest for us. All right, we have Emperor Justinian, a portrait of him, and a portrait of Empress Theodora. And so, like I said, why are they there? So they sent an envoy to Ravenna to take control of Ravenna, to take it back from the Goths. And so it was this yellowy color, and then they made it the red color again. They reestablished control of the Roman Empire via the Byzantine Empire back in Italy. They took it back from the Goths. All right, so on the excuse me, on the apse, Christ is looking down at the portrait of Justinian, and this is the artwork that I want you guys to know. Well, there's two of them, this one and Theodora's. We'll get to Theodora in a minute. All right, so this is Justinian, the emperor, surrounded by his entourage. We'll look closely at that in a second. And then we have Theodora surrounded by her entourage. Don't worry, we're going to get back to this. So if you look closely or a little bit closer at the portrait of Justinian, he is in the center. He is wearing purple. Remember that purple is the color of royalty. Purple is a very expensive dye to make. And so, therefore, purple clothes are expensive to come by. And he is surrounded by his court. On his left, our right, is the clergy. These are men of priesthood. One is holding a cross. Come on, I need to get a new laser pointer. One is holding a cross, one is holding the Bible, and the other one is holding incense. What is that incense thing called? It's called, I'll have to look it up. The object. It's called a censer. That's what it is. All right, it's a censer. On his right, our left, are a group of soldiers. All figures are frontal and they're schematic. What I mean by schematic is basically the same thing as iconic. These guys are not realistic, all right? They're not in realistic poses. They're not in a realistic setting. They're not in a realistic proportions. And well, I'll get to it in a second. They're very abstracted. So we're getting into the medieval era or the Middle Ages, and this area is leaving the classical era behind. The tradition of naturalism is now a thing of the past. This stuff is new. We want things to be iconic. So the emperor is leading a procession, and like I pointed out, the clergy is holding a book, most likely the Bible, and they're holding incense. That object is called a censer. And oh, and the other thing is later on, like for the test, you need to be able to identify what style something is. A big giveaway for Byzantine is a gold background. All right, that is a very common Byzantine trait in these mosaics to have a gold background. Make sure that you write that down. All right, let's get even a little bit closer. Now, Justinian and the people just around him, these are actual portraits. These are real people. And you can see it in their faces that they have, even though their faces are quite iconic and they have very similar style of eyes and stuff, but you can see that they are very differentiated. And I bet if the people were standing in front of me, I would be able to identify, pick out which one is which. And on the other hand, all the soldiers have the same face. They are anonymous. And then the bowl that he's holding is associated with the Eucharist. It's a reference to Christ of eat this, that is my body, and drink this, it is my blood. And then I just find this very amusing. It all looks like they're floating in the sky. Their feet have this gentle glow about them. There's no shadow. There's no sense of weight that they are standing on anything. So I just think it's a bit funny. And then the other portrait, so the Justinian is facing his wife, Theodora. She is facing her husband, Justinian, and they have a very similar portrait. She also is wearing purple. It doesn't really show in this image, but and then she is surrounded by her entourage. And what I think is interesting about hers is that look at the fabrics of the women. They have prints on their clothes. And if we get close to it, it shows really a high skill of making a mosaic. Are we done with the title and date? Are we ready to move on? So now we are also going to, we're staying in Ravenna. Here's Ravenna. We're going to go into another church and we're going to look at the Apse mosaic. And it is a mosaic of Saint Apollinaris amid sheep. You see Saint in the center. You can see the sheep lined up along the sides. By the way, what pose is he in? What is the name of that pose? The Orance page pose. All right, so I should have a story time um, slide here. I'll put it in later. So Bishop Apollinaris was martyred under Vespanius. So St. Peter sent Apollinaris to Ravenna, Italy, as its first bishop. His preaching of the good news was so successful that the pagans there beat him and drove him from the city. He returned, however, and was exiled a second time. After preaching in the area surrounding Ravenna, he entered the city again. After being cruelly tortured, he was put on a ship heading to Greece. Pagans in Greece caused him to be expelled back to Italy, where he went to Ravenna for a fourth time. And so he died from wounds received during a savage beating at Classis, a suburb of Ravenna. So, so a beautiful basilica honoring him was built there in the 6th century. So this is the apse in that basilica church that honors Saint Apollinaris. Now, why is it a basilica church and not a central plan church? If we go back to this church, this is a basilica church. Why is it a basilica church, not a central plan church? Where is it? Yeah, so it's in Italy. So it's in the Western Empire, not the Eastern Empire. So churches in the Western Empire follow the basilica plan. Churches in the Eastern Empire follow the central plan. All right, so let's take a look at Saint Apollinaris. He's in the middle of the apse. He has that frontal position, that Orance pose, and it's the same pose as the priest below him. And what that refers to is as the service is done on Sundays, the priest will hold that same pose, and you can see the image of the saint above him doing the same thing. And this is a further retreat from naturalism or realism. The attempt is not to recreate the physical world, but it has a lot of flat forms. Look at the rocks and plants that are behind him. Very abstract. And look at how they're equally spaced amongst each other. There's very little overlapping, which would be in real life. It's almost like we have like a flat plane, and then people plant or place the rocks and bushes so that it evenly covers the area. And that's just not how nature works. So it is a total, either a lack of understanding of three-dimensional space, or they are purposely not creating a three-dimensional space. So they're rejecting spatial illusionism. They are want to portray a higher image. They're making it look more godlike. If heaven is something totally different than this earth, then to portray things that are heavenly, you want to get away from the earth. You want to get away from naturalism. And also, we are not looking at people; we're looking at spirits. They do not move as we do. They do not exist in the same space as we do. All right, and then just for fun, I want to so we have two photographs here. Which photograph is a person that is floating, and which one is a person standing on the ground? The right one is standing on the ground. How do you know? There's a shadow on the feet, right? There's a shadow right under the feet. So that's how you make somebody look like they're standing on something. So if you do a drawing, all you need to do is add just a little bit of a shadow down at the bottom by the feet, and then it looks like the person is standing on the ground. If you go here, these people look like they are floating in above the ground. All right, now if we look above the apse, we have the triumphal arch of the sheep uh, ascending towards Jesus. All right, and the sheep is a metaphor for us. And then we have the four apostles. We have John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are depicted. On the left, the sheep are coming out of Jerusalem. On the right, the sheep are coming out of Bethlehem. The cities are very expressive and abstracted. And the sheep are walking out of the cities, up the mountain, and up to heaven. The landscape is highly abstracted. Look how schematic and decorative it is. And like I said before, look at the spacing between the trees. It's very unnatural. Everything is flat. There's no illusionism. Nothing really overlaps. There's very little overlapping. And this flatness reminds me of Egyptian art, where everything is on the same level. There's no intuitive perspective either. No aerial perspective, no linear perspective. Individual motifs are treated completely separately and they're unrelated to each other. 12 sheep refer to the apostles. And in the center of the cross above him is Jesus. Oh, come on. Right there. There are 99 gold stars. And then we have an alpha and omega sign, signifying that Christ is the beginning and the end. Christ is all things. And then on the left and the right, we have a reference to the Transfiguration story. Will it play?
Stories of the Bible, the Transfiguration. This is Jesus, hey-o, who is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. While Jesus was on earth, he taught everyone about God's love and healed people from their sickness. He did many miracles like calming storms and even raised people from the dead. Wahoo! One day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain to pray. As Jesus was praying, he was transformed so that his face shined like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus about how he would leave from this world. Peter didn't know what to say, and they were all afraid. So he said, excuse me? It's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. But as Peter was speaking, a bright cloud came over them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved Son, who brings me great joy. Listen to him." disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. Jesus came over and touched them. He said, "Get up, don't be afraid." And when the disciples looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone. Come on, guys. As they went back down the mountain, Jesus told them not to tell anyone what they saw until they saw that he was raised from the dead. Okay. So they kept it to themselves, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead.
All right, so this story of the Transfiguration shows up a lot in these early Christian churches, in the mosaics and in artworks. So the Transfiguration is the moment when Christ revealed his divine nature. So in this image, in this apse, Christ is the cross. The lambs are Peter, James, and John of the story that we just looked at. Moses is on the left up here, and Elijah is up here on the right. And then God's hand is up here in the center, and it shows the presence of God. In the Old Testament, figures are shown as human. In the New Testament, the Old Testament figures are shown as human. That is this one and this one. And then the New Testament figures are shown as animals. And that's the ones down here that are circled. It is symbolic rather than figural, and it leads to iconoclasm, which we'll talk about in just a second. This is why this image is so important. It connects the pre-iconoclasm to iconoclasm. All right, so go ahead and write down that term iconoclasm. ICONOCLASM. It's going to pop up in just a slide or two, but I want you to know that term as I discuss it. With iconoclasm, there are passages in the Bible that say that it's a sin to create works of art that look like people, places, or things. And some people read those passages and then went nuts with it, meaning you're not allowed to make any art at all. And so we're going to get into a time where there's not much art being made. And this is leading to that, where it's not good to show people. And so we're beginning to see these people being shown as animals instead of human beings. And that is leading up to iconoclasm. All right. And here we go. Here's iconoclasm. So look at this church. What is there to look at? Nothing. All right, here's what I want you guys to do. Go to your next empty page in your sketchbook. Go to your next empty page. Write the word iconoclasm in the middle of it. And then don't write anything else on that page, because iconoclasm is all a bunch of nothing. All right, so when you're taking your notes, skip to the next page after iconoclasm and begin taking notes there. I want the iconoclasm page to be empty except for one word, iconoclasm. The only image that is allowed is that of the cross. You can see it there in the apse. I've got to get a new laser pointer.
Can I put a picture of the cross on the iconoclasm page and see it?
So there was a fear that people were worshiping images and not venerating them, all right, paying homage to them. There was a fear that people were using images to pass through and get direct access to the figure. And it lasted until the mid 800s, not 1800s. That would be awful. But it lasted until the mid 800s. and symbolism is more important than representation. And experts believe that every image in Constantinople was destroyed during this period. That's the other thing. Not only did they not make art, but they destroyed art that was already made. So iconoclasm is a rough time in art history. All right. Um, so we have this before and after of iconoclasm. On the left, we have this image that we just discussed, and on the right, it becomes much more like realistic. The figures, again, it has that solid gold background, and that is a sign of what? Byzantine. All right, so, but these are both images of the Transfiguration story. All right, so we're going to look at icons next.
The painting of icons on wood is a multi-step, many-layered process that is rich with symbolism. We will examine this icon of Christ the Pantocrator as one example of the icon writing process. Icons are typically painted on boards made from linden, pine, or poplar wood. The wood must be minimally resinous, without any imperfections. It is dried for up to 2 years. The board is cut from the center of the tree with a vertical grain. Slats of a harder wood, inserted into the back of the board at the top and bottom, provide support and prevent cracking as the board expands and contracts with moisture. A recessed area, or kovcheg, is carved in the center of the board to create a raised frame around the perimeter of the icon. Kovcheg, or ark, refers to the Ark of Noah and the Ark of the Covenant. Traditionally, it is believed to separate the sacred world, paradise, from the secular world. Next, the sanding and scoring of the board prepares the surface for proper adhesion of the linen surface. Hide glue is applied next. Linen is affixed to the glue to provide a smooth surface for the application of gesso and to protect against the flaking of paint if the board cracks. The icon writer covers the board with several very thin layers of gesso, or a mixture of marble dust, chalk, and glue. The final layer is sanded. The finished gesso surface is completely smooth, almost porcelain-like. The composition for the icon begins on paper. Master icon writers often draw their own image, adapted from accepted conventions. Less experienced icon writers select a published image, or their teachers provide one. One method of transferring the image to the board uses carbon paper or powdered pigment affixed to the back of tracing paper. The transfer paper is placed on the board, and the icon writer uses a writing implement to trace the lines, leaving a faint outline of the image on the gessoed board. With many icons, the halo extends beyond the kovcheg to create a bridge between the spiritual world and the world of the viewer. Tracing the image with a sharp implement creates an incised rendering of the image. As the transferred lines are covered by layers of pigment, the incised lines remain as a guide. An application of clay bowl covers the edges of the board, as well as any area that will be gilded. Traditionally, the clay symbolizes mankind, or the earth from which Adam was created. Before the gold leaf can be applied to the bowl must be sanded and burnished. Layers of gold leaf are applied to the bowl ground. Gold leaf may cover the entire background or just a small area, such as a halo. To make the sheets bond to the bowl, the icon writer exhales on the bowl to create a thin layer of condensation to which the gold leaf can adhere. This action symbolizes the breath of life. After the gold leaf has hardened to the surface, it can be burnished or incised with a decorative pattern. Icons are painted with egg tempera, a type of paint created by mixing mineral pigments with egg yolk. Tempera dries quickly. making it particularly suitable for building up multiple thin layers of paint to create luminosity. It also lasts well with little fading over time. The first paint applied to the icon is the alpha line, which is red and typically applied around the halo. Sankir are the base layers that represent skin and hair, typically rendered in an olive green. Thin base
Notice that
layers
it's
of paint
painted green. The
called
skin is
gloss
painted
rich
green
are applied
first.
across the entire icon all at once. Following the traced and incised lines, the icon writer uses diluted pigments to block in the large areas of color. Colors are applied from darkest to lightest. Additional layers create the forms. The building up of layers in this manner creates luminosity within the icon. Floats, or nearly transparent washes of pigment, are painted over each highlight layer. Denser colors of pigment cover the incised lines of the composition. The addition of tiny details takes place at the very end of the process. A final highlight, typically bright white, is added to the icon. These life-giving lights, or ojivki in Russian, do not suggest or conform to any outside light source, but rather seem to come from within the figures. A thin border is painted around the outside edge of the icon board. The icon writer then inscribes the figure's name and other text that may appear on books or scrolls. In historic icons, such inscriptions are written in Church Slavonic, an archaic form of Russian. After the icon is balanced for final highlights and shading, a white line, or omega line, is painted outside the halo's alpha line. This is the last paint to be applied to the icon. To anoint the icon writer covers it with linseed oil, or oliva, to protect it and to heighten the luminous effect. Depending on the climate, it may take several months for the icon to dry completely.
All right, so that's how icons are made. I'm going to skip past this. Oh, we're going to not do that. All right, so an icon is an image of a holy person. Sorry. It's a religious painting, and Luke was the first person to paint an icon, and that is Luke in the image on the left, painting an icon. And in an icon, the spiritual reality is more important than historical reality. So these are very iconic. It's a wood panel with a religious figure painted on it, and it's meant for private veneration in your home. It is a small work of art, probably about the size of like maybe a large book, and you keep it in your house. It's not really meant for churches. We've been looking at artwork that's been in churches, and they're very large artwork so that lots of people can see it. But an icon is very small. You have it in your house, you set it up on your wall or on a shelf, and then you pray to it. And it is a half length of a figure. It's usually from their chest or their waist up to their head. So they do not tell a story, so they are not narrative. But basically, the message is that we are face to face with divinity. It is a one on one painting that we pray with. We're going to go to St. Catherine's Monastery in Mount Sinai in Egypt. This is the location where Moses saw the burning bush. And one of the art historians I saw said it was a miracle he saw any bushes at all. All right. There's very dry weather there for preserving manuscripts and art. And in their museum that they have there, they have one called Christ Blessing. And it's the one in the center here that we will look up. Christ is holding in his right hand, his hand is in the pose of blessing. So we have these the two fingers that are slightly raised, and then in his other hand he's holding the Bible. We look closely at his face. What is wrong with the face? Does it? To me, it doesn't look symmetrical, right? The eyes are not the same. The left side and the right side of the face are not the same. All right, it looks a bit odd. Like I said, his hand is in the pose of the benediction. Anyways, famous painting, famous icon, Christ's blessing. We're going to stop here for today. There are 5 minutes left in class. Are there any questions about anything so far?